the only way we're going to shake things up and make the world a more just and equitable place is if we start to think about the conditions of other folks, not just the things that touch us.
Welcome to Giving Done Right, a podcast on everything you need to know to make an impact with your charitable giving. I'm Grace Nicolette.
And I'm Phil Buchanan. How you doing, Grace?
Hey, Phil.
I'm excited about the conversation with David Shapiro. He's the CEO of Mentor, which is such an important organization. They expand quality mentoring relationships for young people. And that is a particularly important mission right now when so many young people are feeling isolated because of the pandemic. Mentoring actually is important at any time, but maybe more crucial now, yields really positive results. And David is a really forceful spokesperson for the importance of mentoring relationships, for the importance of donors actually investing in relationships and not just focusing on things like buildings or curriculum. And he is also really great at just explaining the role that nonprofits, from big national organizations to small community-based ones, play in making the fabric of our society stronger. So I'm excited for our conversation with David Shapiro.
Right. And we're really trying to share a breadth of perspectives from the nonprofit sector. The last episode, we had a community-based leader focused in a particular region. And today we have David, who works nationally. And so giving everyone a sense of the range of nonprofits and the kinds of work that they do, I think is really important. David, welcome to Giving Done Right.
It's so good to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Tell us about yourself and what led you to mentor. And also, why does mentoring matter to you?
First of all, I feel like it's always important to own your own journey. I was born to a lot of stability and a lot of love and a lot of opportunity. And so from the beginning, kind of had that head start and had things that you need to sort of grow up healthy. And then I was lucky enough by birth to have. And I think that set me also on a track of thinking about the mark that I wanted to leave on the world, because my family wasn't focused on survival and getting through the next hour. I had the privilege of thinking long term, which is a gift to any young person. In college, started thinking about sports and coaching and teaching and the places that seemed the most diverse and inclusive in my life. That led me to a foundation that Tiger Woods had catalyzed. And being at a foundation gave me a really good view into the sector, made me really passionate about these tricky things called nonprofits and how hard they are to run well. I think the machinery of them was almost more interesting to me than the issues at the beginning. I was not a sort of one issue guy. I was not a mentoring guy. I knew there was something about youth development and public service and sports and inclusivity that was interesting to me, but I really more was seeing these organisms called nonprofits where the consumer was often a third party. The community was often the supporter as a public trust. And how did you make all those two things go at the same time and do it effectively and run it both in a smart business way as well as in a smart service way and with a mission basis? And I just became passionate about that. And then my nonprofit kind of leadership and management career led me to Mass Mentoring Partnership, which is our state affiliate, and ultimately to national. And then also just seeing this thing around relationship as a thread that ran through everything in my life, just enormous relationship privilege, and being awakened to how much that was a strand through what young people need throughout the settings that they're in, and how could we make that more present, just became an obsession in addition to sort of running nonprofits well.
The theme of relationships has certainly been a thread through a lot of our episodes. So Mentor relies on a network of volunteers to help young people navigate their day-to-day challenges, academics, and career opportunities. And it strikes me that even the most jaded of donors who are very guarded around giving, or the way that nonprofits are run, sort of they can have some misconceptions. They can connect with this idea that perhaps there was someone in their life who really gave them an opportunity or a hand up. Do you view volunteering as a mentor as a gateway to giving?
I think it absolutely is. I mean, I think it's a gateway to even more than giving, right? It's a gateway to get past our own perceptions of the world and the labels that I think hold us back. The minute we decide that someone is a welfare mom or a low income individual or whatever sort of phrase you want to use that are bandied about in political circles to score points all the time, but also at cocktail parties as shortcuts to get us through conversations. The minute we do that, we lose a little part of our humanity, we lose a little part of our intellect, and we use a little part of our ability to solve problems. When you pick a young person up at their home in their context on a Saturday, or you meet with them at lunchtime in a school building, all of a sudden, whatever you think about things is shaken a little bit. And that's a good kind of shaken. That's the best kind of shaken. And I think it can lead to giving. You think about dead end comments like people will say, well, my children aren't in the public schools don't work. I mean, right? That's a terrible comment, and it makes you not excited about paying tax dollars. It makes you not excited about thinking about how philanthropy might advance public schools. And you're also marching with your own feet away from something that is the most important public trust that we maybe have for young people. And so walking into a public school to mentor a young person might demystify a lot of those things.
David, there's some language on the mentoring.org website says potential is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. But how do you actually know that you're closing that opportunity gap? How do you know that mentoring works? What is your role as an organization in making sure that it does? Because I can imagine a donor might say, okay, I want to support mentoring. It makes sense, but what really is its impact?
What mentoring allows for as both a donor and a volunteer and a mentor is to sort of bisect your brain in two places, which is hard. And it's important that we do it this way, which is to think about individual impact, right? So, an individual person might be the very connection. We know that someone is 12 times more likely to get a job, say, through a referral. LinkedIn has that data. We know that social capital is a huge part of how you find your way to opportunities. We know that an advocate at a school can make certain things happen for a student that often they can't make happen for themselves. And we know that parents are differently equipped to be able to show up at schools for a variety of different reasons, having nothing to do with love or effort. So we know that when young people have advocacy and unconditional support through systems, whether they be school, workplace, community, they have better results. They have better success. I mean, we've done, study upon study, whether they're randomized control trial studies or more sort of consumer studies comparing young people who can identify a mentor as a kid versus ones who can't, and whether they attain college achievement, have a job they want, all those kinds of things. The question becomes, and this is the important part of the work that we do at Mentor. One, all mentoring is not created equal. Mentoring has to have quality practices in place that are evidence based in order to be successful. It also must be up to the job. It must be proportional to the problem that you're trying to solve. And mentoring is used as a tool to address a lot of problems. And so it's got to be used for the right problems with the right proportion of mentoring and the right kind. And that's something we really do a lot of work on, is helping people and helping donors also see that, like, do you really think mentoring is the sole thing that's up to this challenge? Because it may not be. You should really be thinking about that. And then two, to help also make the systemic changes that will help us end up with mentor rich environments, right? So a debate that's going on in America right now that may not feel relative to mentoring, but it is should we have law enforcement in school buildings or guidance counselors, if that's really a choice? We're going to opt for guidance counselors. Not that law enforcement can't serve as a kind of mentor, but law enforcement for certain young people is never going to serve as a mentor. And their role and the symbolism is often never going to be seen that way. We want school buildings to be, we talk about relationship centered schools and helping districts be relationship centered places. They're going to need those kinds of adults in the building. So it's working systemically, which is a lot of mentors' role, work on policy and solutions and systems change to create mentor rich environments. And then it's also helping organizations practice rigor and intentionality that will allow mentoring to be up to the job it's trying to solve.
Can you explain just a little bit more for a listener who might not understand the landscape? What is the role that you play relative to the umpteen community-based organizations that are doing mentoring? How does it work if somebody listening wants to either be a donor to a organization that does mentoring in their community, or they want to mentor themselves? Can you just lay that out for folks a little?
At its most basic level, Our job is to sort of like lead and serve the cause category. So you think about Feeding America or Stand Up to Cancer. It's to take any human being or institution that says, I want this to be a more mentor rich place for America's kids, and on ramp them into the movement. That could mean a number of things via Mentor, our organization. It could mean you're doing a zip code search on the Mentoring Connector to become a mentor at a quality program in your neighborhood. We're the only ones that vet and keep that database of quality mentoring programs throughout the country. It could mean you want to find out, what policies might help schools or workforce development have more mentors for young people to be successful. It could mean your company wants to find a local program or connect with one of our local affiliates who also serve as training hubs. You want to know who's quality. All of those things Mentor serves as. A lot of people say like we have a vertical when they think in business terms, but no category. Mentor is the category. There are verticals, national verticals like Big Brothers Big Sisters, Year Up, Youth Build, Boys and Girls Clubs, I Mentor, College Mentors for Kids. There are also verticals like Greater Zion Church of God Teen Choices Mentoring Program for Girls. That is a smaller program that's not nationally affiliated. Mentor serves as all of their kind of cause leader, providing the training, the advocacy, and the on ramping of human beings and institutions into the mentoring movement.
How has this work changed because of the fact that we're in a global pandemic and mentoring face to face or getting in a car to go to a park or a game might not make a lot of sense? Can you talk about the challenge that organizations and mentoring programs are facing as a result?
The most immediate challenge, and the one that we focused our attention on, was the thousands of organizations serving millions of matches that already existed and were meeting in physical spaces, that now we're sort of saying one thing to mentors, which is keep connecting. It's more important than ever, but didn't have tools to do so because they had never focused on virtual solutions. Very interesting, right? Something that maybe judgmentally was thought of as less than all of a sudden became more than, just like it did in our own lives, like, well, I could fly there and that would be the Taj Mahal, but I'll put you on Zoom and that feels like I'm doing something secondary for you. This became the primary mode. And so mentoring programs obviously don't have a lot of money. The average mentoring program has about $150,000 budget. They're small budget organizations for the most part. And so we created, along with two partners who had already been leaders in the e-mentoring space, these virtual mentoring portals, one for under 12 and one for 13 and over, with nonprofit partners who were already trusted leaders, raised some money to subsidize it being free, and triaged organizations onto a safe virtual platform. So that was really our first sort of thing that Mentor did. There are still a ton of mentors that are obviously using text and Zoom and finding whatever connection they can. One of the biggest challenges, I would say twofold, a lot of mentoring matches are dependent on institutions that serve the young people already in a physical space. And so when they lost connection to school or to Boys and Girls Club, they may have lost connection to their mentee. And that's a hard thing to get back, especially they don't even have personal information in a lot of cases. These are site based mentoring programs. It's hard to solve for that. What I would say otherwise is just the way in which this pandemic holds up a mirror to everything that's wonderful about us and everything that ails us. You see lots of heroic stories of folks finding their mentee and making connections and even advocating for those young people to get laptops and families to get what they need and becoming a really important social resource broker. You also see families that can't even get online and who are trying to meet basic needs. And so mentoring is secondary, and so social emotional needs that may be primary for a young person, it's hard to meet because all these other things are taking priority. And that is affecting kids more than we are talking about, unfortunately.
Yeah, the isolation is an issue for all kids. And then the fact that it is exacerbated for those who most maybe need that connection is just so frustrating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, I think that purpose and belonging is something we talk about a lot at Mentor in terms of thinking about what mentoring does for young people. And you think that young people had all of their purpose and belonging, ripped from them as it relates to institutions they go to, not their homes, but as it relates to institutions they go to, in a moment's notice. And as is typical of sort of America, capitalism, productivity, we figured out with work and adults how to keep marching on. I mean, to some degree, this doesn't, extend to restaurants and some other places, but in white collar work, we figured out how to be resilient and march on. For young people, we were less up to that challenge and have been less up to that challenge. It's going to require some serious investment and redress because we're not addressing it at the federal level. It is being addressed in some localities, but I feel like it's a less appreciated part of the crisis right now is what's going on with our young people.
Given what you just described, and also what you were saying earlier about there being regional groups and obviously national groups and even different verticals, what advice do you have to donors who want to support mentoring?
One piece I have of advice that I think gets people a little bit twisted up around mentoring is because it may have happened for them organically, because they may have had an Uncle Joe or a Coach Phil, there's something that feels unnatural to them about investing in relationships for young people. But there isn't a better investment on earth, or at least it's tied with a lot of other investments. When you're on your deathbed, you're going to think about the relationships you've had. There's a million books, you can read any of them, and everybody seems to reflect on the human beings in their life at the end. So that tells me they must be pretty darn important. And everybody wants to talk about their mentors, but we still have a tough time sort of transferring the natural mentors that have come into our lives or our kids' lives and thinking about the fact that there may be an institution that needs to make that happen and what could be a better investment. So, I mean, my thought is just to tell donors like, if there were ever a time to invest in relationships, do it. Find mentoring programs that are not hard to find. They can find them on our website. And if you can invest your time, which I think is another thing, we are in a field where volunteering has sort of almost always been held over donating. Like it's like I could be a mentor is the one thing everybody thinks about. And it's like, no, you don't have to just be a mentor. You could donate to a mentoring program, which is, equally as good. I think in other parts of the nonprofit sector, people don't think that way. They're like, I couldn't go be on a Red Cross disaster relief truck. Like, I'm not, even though they could volunteer to do that, but they think like, well, I got to donate to the Red Cross. Like, this is the way I help. I donate with my money. In mentoring, we've led so much with the volunteer ask that it obscures the fact that there's human beings doing this work who are creating the matching and relationship support that makes mentoring successful. And they're incredible magicians and professionals threading strangers together in powerful relationships. And why wouldn't you want to invest in that? So I'd say spend a portion of your philanthropic money on relationships. It's the most powerful thing we've got.
What other donor behaviors do you want to see more of, and what do you want to see less of?
A phrase that we coined with the My Brother's Keeper Alliance and with the Obama Foundation was it's not just what you stand for, but who you stand with. I think there's a tendency to donate at arm's length. Philanthropy can be a really narcissistic act in powerful ways that are positive, but also I think in ways that are really limiting, especially as it relates to being equitable and proximate. If this disease touched my child or my child was in this program, then I should give. Well, okay, that's fine. But how about thinking about what might be affecting another kid's child? Because the only way we're going to shake things up and make the world a more just and equitable place is if we start to think about the conditions of other folks, not just the things that touch us. It's just a natural donor behavior. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm asking that we enlarge the pie. I'm not asking that we shift the pie, but that we tend to really donate to the things and issues that feel close. And if we do that, we're going to keep perpetuating things. And then I think we practice a kind of lazy activism at times for the things that are not close to us. We get online and rail about it. But what I would ask is spend money on the things that are not close to you, because those are the things that are going to make the world a more equitable and just place. They're also going to help you to understand the conditions of other people and educate you, make your life a more expansive place, and have you learn about issues you might never have thought about before. There's a thoughtfulness to philanthropy that I think is really important, but I also wish we just had a little bit more like of a luxury spend approach to our donating. Like if you read about something that's great, give $100 to it. Like we sometimes overthink donating in a way that we would never overthink an online purchase of something we like. what's wrong with just reading a great article about something and being like, we're going to give that $100? Like, I just think we're unproportional about the way we donate. It's like $50 is akin to like a $500 purchase for something,
Yes.
like we overthink it. So anyway, I just wish we would impulse buy a little bit in our donating as well.
I think I totally agree because when we buy something, we don't ask the many, many questions that donors often like to ask with a small gift like $50. And that can be a real burden for nonprofits. Personally, during this time, I think one of the reflections I've had is if I receive an ask that is, say, less than $50 that I could have easily spent on groceries or another totally unneeded piece of clothing, then I'll go ahead and do that because I want to make sure my values are aligned in my giving. So that's a really good example and reminder.
It's also empowering, right? It's an action you can take. A lot of people right now are sort of like, what action can I take? I think in political donating, we do see this, right? I mean, we're seeing that it's the reason why the, the amounts of money spent in a political cycle are amazing. And I know we think about the big donors who are trying to have influence, but I think about all the small donors who like, this is an act of protest. This is an act of, experiencing their values. This is an act of saying, I'm reflected in that campaign. I wish we could gin up that same spirit about nonprofits. So if you're like, oh my God, all these kids are alone, okay, donate $100 to a mentoring program. Like that would help.
I think that there's this tension, obviously, right? Because if you're only responsive, you're going to look back at the end of the year at your gifts and you're not going to feel like it even aligned remotely with your own priorities. But if you're completely rigid and unwilling to learn and see and respond to what is happening, then that's a problem too. So it's about the balance, I think. And right now, it's probably going to mean digging deeper.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I want to ask you about something else related to this. It's sort of question of like how donors think about where to give. And it's about scale, right? There's been a lot of critique of nonprofits. There's too much inefficiency. What we need is scale, which gets defined as the growth of a particular organization to do everywhere what they started doing in Toledo. And sometimes that makes sense. But it seems to me that there's another way of thinking about scale where what you're doing actually at Mentor is helping to scale approaches that might then be implemented by very small organizations that might be best placed to do what they do by virtue of their smallness. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that there are certainly a number of both economic and sort of identity reasons why there aren't a lot of action forcing mechanisms for nonprofits in general to sort of merge and do what might seemingly in the marketplace be efficient. So I'm sure there are efficiencies to be had, just like there are efficiencies in everything. But I also couldn't agree with you more, and especially as it relates to weaving together human beings and relationships, that there is a certain quality of being of and by the community. If you're calling your faith members to be mentors in a ministry to young people, you couldn't export those 50 matches to any other organization. Like it's something about the identity of that community that's calling people to mentoring. Same with your school and others. So I do think there's a way to invest in groups like ours that in a field help other people have free access. Virtually all of our resources are free. Keep people from recreating the wheel. Now, I will also tell you, our local affiliates, and I used to run one for 7 years, Mass Mentoring, part of their job is to convince people maybe you shouldn't start a mentoring program. Like there's one down the street, they're flying at 10,000 feet. One of my board members said, we're like air traffic control for mentoring. Their job is to make sure we're not just proliferating for the sake of proliferating, that we are trying to find efficiencies. And so I think that's one of the importance of having like a field leader or an intermediary that thinks about that. But I couldn't agree with you more, Phil, that the too many nonprofits thing, I think, is a very much an emotional reaction to I've got too many direct mail pieces on my mail table, or there's too many galas for me to go to. I don't know how scientific it is. It's more emotional, and it's to the point that I can't give to everything. Just like we like coffee shops that are boutiques that know our neighborhood or are down the street, there are nonprofits that are better because they're boutiques. And, we should honor that. One thing our local affiliates try to help do is when one, like an iMentor, tries to go from New York to Baltimore, they try to help iMentor understand the mentoring programs that are already in Baltimore and how to fit into the scene instead of just coming and saying, we've got this great model and we've got a donor that wants us to come to Baltimore, so we're coming. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that I think like, they come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they're better off being of the local community.
I think that's such an important point because I speak to so many donors who see that as being the downside of the nonprofit sector. And oftentimes the conversation coming from me is that, no, actually, this is the richness of the nonprofit sector. There really is a trade off between perceived efficiency, but really, each community's needs are so different. And there really isn't this super clinical way of coming in and looking at a problem, but really there's sort of this flourishing. It's more like a ecosystem than this very like rigid program that people try to implement everywhere.
If we challenged people back, right, on that notion, like, would you like your neighborhood little league to be run by the city? They would say no. I think it's only when they think about themselves as like investors or sort of weary donors that they start wanting to mesh everything together and feeling like, oh my God, it's too much. There must be efficiencies to be had. I don't think they think about that in their own lives, about the nonprofits and civic organizations that they're a part of.
All of this stuff is about healthy tensions, I think it seems to me. Like, on the one hand, the sort of flourishing that Grace alluded to of many different nonprofits. On the other hand, there you are saying, if you are going to mentor, there are certain elements of effectiveness you should follow regardless of your context. So both things are true, that we need organizations to be rooted in community, to be most effective and to be trusted. And at the same time, we also need organizations to pay attention to what has been learned about what works. Those can coexist.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it depends on what kind of donor you want to be and what kind of participant in civic, life you want to be and how deep you want to go on a given topic. You may have a thirst for understanding the entire landscape on one issue. And on the other, you're just like, it seems like a good little organization. I want to give them $100. This seems important right now. And I think, as you said earlier about doing both, it's important to do both. It's important to stay with who you've been with, and it's important to find new things to give to. And the tapestry is really, really rich. And the one other thing I would sort of call donors to your question before is, I think we have an obsession with things in donating the same way we do in life, in capitalistic life, which is that we want to build buildings and we want to buy curriculum. And we have some sort of weird allergy to humans for whatever reason, not the nonprofit leader. For some reason, the nonprofit leader is a little bit exempt from this. Everybody loves the nonprofit charismatic leader. But like the human staff that do the work, the volunteers that do the mentoring, the guy that everybody calls Mr. Jimmy who holds the whole neighborhood together, like these are the humans we should be investing in. And there's this kind of weird thing in like, am I investing in staff and humans? I don't want to do that. Well, yes, you do. Like, that's the magic of organizations, is the humans within it. And so that's one other weird donor thing that has happened over time that I would say, invest in humans, invest in relationships, invest in staff. They're who is delivering these things that make it great.
Oh, it's so maddening, this notion that I don't want my donation to go towards salary or the rent. Well, how's the work going to get done? I know Rusty Stahl and Fund the People have been working to try to make the case that, look, there are people who do this work. They need to be paid a competitive wage if you want to get good people. And the work doesn't happen absent that.
Absolutely. And you never hear anybody say, I went to a great school, it changed my life, the curriculum and the building was awesome.
Right.
They talk about the teachers.
Right.
They talk about the after school counselors. They talk about human beings. And I just don't know why this is the one sector where it's not like, I'm attracted to and want to invest in world-class people. Like, we should be into that.
I totally resonate with that. I think sometimes there's almost this sense in which people who work in nonprofits are expected to do it just completely out of the goodness of their hearts. But that's not a frame that folks will apply to themselves, right? Let's say, well, I should be paid for the work that I do. And the work that folks on your team do is not any easier or less important than any other kind of roles that are out there. So that's really a false dichotomy in my mind. David, to end our sessions, we like to ask each of our guests, giving done right to you is about fill in the blank. How would you answer that?
Giving done right to me is about doing so with the most open of minds and hearts that you can do so. It's about figuring out how to realize that giving of time is an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to express, an opportunity to reach your hand out. And it's an opportunity to walk alongside other people, whether you may ever know them or not. But it's not to figure out what to say no to. It's about how to say yes and how to be part of the civic fabric. That to me is what giving done right is all about. And I can't think of a more enriching experience and one that's been more enriching in my life.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all. And thanks for doing this.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Phil.
Phil, it's so apparent from our conversation with David that we often don't prioritize the things that are most important in life. Like he talked about relationships that, when we are on our deathbeds, we may look back and we're not going to think about necessarily what jobs we had or how much we were paid, but really we would think back and think about the people that we impacted and that have impacted us. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's hard to answer that, Grace, but I think he sort of touched on it when he talked about this sort of materialistic and transactional nature of our culture, that we prioritize what we can see or physical things that we purchase. This is more ephemeral. It's harder to get your arms around. And while we can all recognize when we step back how powerful and important relationships are, yeah, it just isn't the way our culture is wired right now. And I think David is doing something really important because he's trying to shift how people think about that and bring the focus back to just how vital relationships are, especially for young people and especially for young people who didn't grow up with the kind of advantages that he describes having in his own childhood.
I agree. I also was very struck by David's full-throated support of the diversity of the nonprofit sector and how models that work in one place may not work everywhere else. And this whole idea of scale and sometimes how we get that wrong, that as donors, sometimes we want to see a good model replicated everywhere, but that sometimes doesn't take into account the particulars of that community, that neighborhood, the people who are implementing the programs. And so that can be frustrating to donors, but I think it's a reality that is actually part of the beauty of the nonprofit sector.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that we have got to get over this notion that size is a proxy for effectiveness. I also liked how you asked him right at the beginning about his perspective on the sort of pathway from volunteering to giving. We keep coming back to this topic, right, of like, how do you get close? How do you get proximate? How do you make sure you're not at a distance? Well, what better way to do that than to develop a meaningful relationship with a young person who might be in very different circumstances than yours? And that then opens up your eyes in all kinds of important ways.
So Phil, where can people go for more information about effective giving?
They can absolutely go to our website, cep.org. They can go to givingdoneright.org for all our podcast episodes and show notes.
Also want to mention your book again, Giving Done Right, which came out last year. It's a great resource.
Thanks, Grace. And you can find us both on Twitter. Grace is at Grace Nicolette, and I'm at Phil X Buchanan. You can also send us a note with any suggestions or comments. gdrpodcast@cep.org is the email address.
And if you like the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps.
Thanks again to David for joining us, and thank you to the CEP podcast team, producer Sarah Martin, research and logistics guru Molly Heidemann, our terrific colleagues Jay Kutska, Ethan McCoy, and Say Darling. Thanks, everyone.